In a perfect world, you would work with everyone to develop your strategy, create Wordly maps and other documentation, and everyone would internalize that and continually remember it with perfect clarity. In reality, people will forget 80% of it when they leave the room. That's why implementing a strategy isn't a one-time task. It requires ongoing reinforcement in your meetings, conversations, and work systems. This module is all about equipping you to implement strategy effectively, align your team and organization to it, and adapt it as circumstances evolve. The good news, you can do this. I swear to God, if I can figure this out, then you can do this. The bad news is there's no magical shortcut or one-size-fits-all tool to ensure success. It's not about templates or agendas. It's about disciplined leadership and constant communication. In my first job, my boss had a simple but important saying: management is work. We can't fall into the trap of thinking that we just set the direction and let people go. Your team members aren't rockets out in space, speeding forward infinitely in the direction you set with no course correction or additional fuel needed. Implementing a strategy is more than just a one-time activity. It must be part of everything you write and everything you say. The hardest part will be forcing yourself to make time for it because, as a leader, you have a lot of demands on your time. It's tempting to cut corners and not reiterate your strategy when writing an epic or sharing a status update. But people forget if they're not reminded. And if they forget, they'll stop making decisions informed by the strategy, and the benefits we discussed in this chapter's first module will disappear. If your company sets annual objectives, communicating strategy is a type of objective that I abhor. That objective might as well be do your job. Our measures of success should be outcomes, and implementing your strategy is actually an input. If you do it well, then good outcomes will follow. This means you can't measure how well you implement your strategy by how often you write it into documents or talk about it in meetings. Your success is measured by how well your team members adhere to the strategy. They'll do that if they understand and internalize the strategy, which will only happen if you communicate it well. Leadership isn't just about doing the work. It's about ensuring your team understands it, embraces the strategy, and applies it effectively. Communication is the bridge that makes this possible. Even the best strategy will fail if it isn't communicated in a way that resonates and sticks with your team. Sadly, there is no perfect method for communicating strategy to all teams across all companies. You will have to experiment and adapt, tailoring your approach to the unique needs of your team. One of the most effective approaches is through collaborative workshops. These aren't just meetings, they're structured conversations designed to clarify vision, mission, and strategy among key stakeholders and team members. Plan ahead by sharing an agenda and pre-read materials to make these workshops effective. I find a concise 6-pager works well here. People who prepare in advance can contribute more effectively during the session. Involve representatives from across the organization: product, engineering, sales, marketing, and finance, plus senior leaders. Successful strategies require cross-departmental buy-in to succeed during implementation. Don't try to develop the strategy by committee when conducting these workshops. Instead, come prepared with a clear proposal, something like, here's the direction I believe we should take. Let's refine it together. I experienced the power of this approach at a previous company. By presenting a clear framework and inviting feedback from stakeholders across the organization, including senior executives, we achieved both stronger alignment and a sense of shared ownership that proved invaluable during implementation. I find that visuals help tremendously. Humans love stories, and we are inherently visual creatures. It also helps to force people to focus their full attention. Since reading the book Back of the Napkin, I've been using simple sketches alongside my explanations, and it seems to be more effective than a list of JIRA tickets or a Gantt chart alone. I also bought storyteller tactics, which you may have seen advertised elsewhere, and I'll link them in the resources, but I've had mixed results using these. Another powerful visual tool is mind mapping, which helps bridge the gap between high-level strategy and specific actions. Start with your strategy in the center of the map, branch out to key objectives, and expand further into particular tactics and tasks. I once facilitated a mind mapping session with a group of engineers to tackle a stalled project. The team had been making little progress for weeks, caught in a cycle of discussion without action. Within an hour of our mind mapping exercise, we identified 25 actionable items, prioritized them, and created a JIRA backlog. What had been weeks of stagnation turned into steady progress, all because we took the time to map it out visually and connect strategy to specific actions. Some people benefit from longer texts, but I found that when I write longer documents, people don't read them. It's not enough to write it. That's an input, not an outcome. People must read and internalize. And that's why Amazon developed their meeting approach of having a 6-page memo and dedicated time at the beginning of a meeting to read it, followed by discussion. That approach almost guarantees success. Imagine you go into a 1-hour meeting with your executive leadership team and give them all 6 pages to read. You want to present a new piece of work, and this document begins with an outline of the work's success measures. Next, it has your company's tenets that help it make decisions, which are typically developed alongside the mission. In the third section, you provide a snapshot of the company's current status with respect to achieving relevant goals, and then a fourth section for applicable lessons learned in the prior year. Next, we get to strategic priorities, but only after establishing the purpose, doctrine, landscape, and climate. You give everyone 15 minutes to read and write down some notes, then begin the discussion. Everyone is focused, has the same baseline information, and should be able to see how this strategy fits into the company's mission. Does it sound awkward and tedious? If you've never done it before, I imagine it does. When you announce in advance, people will grumble. After the first time doing it, though, they'll marvel and appreciate it. It's essential to recognize that different stakeholders need different levels and types of information. Some executives prefer granular details, while others want the big picture. In my experience, developing multiple formats of strategic documentation has been valuable. For example, I've created both thematic roadmaps for long-term planning and objective-based documents for executive stakeholders. This dual approach ensures that everyone, from engineers to senior leaders, receives the information they need in a format that makes sense to them. This tailored approach to communication acknowledges that what works for one audience may not work for another. The key is ensuring that all versions align with and reinforce the same core strategic message, just packaged differently. That's the essence of the work you must do as a leader. Remember that the fifth factor of strategy from The Art of War is leadership, and leading your team is your job. Sometimes leadership involves coaching your team to embrace practices that don't immediately seem exciting or innovative. Don't let people talk you out of being a good leader. Remember that our success is ultimately measured by the outcomes, and if you're not creating good inputs, you can't achieve those outcomes. It isn't helpful if your only input is a Wordly map on a fig jam board that nobody looks at. Your job is to continually use the map to guide your team and update it when the landscape and climate change. By staying disciplined and committed to the fundamentals, you'll achieve the desired outcomes and build a team that understands and embodies the strategy. And that's the hallmark of outstanding leadership. While consistent communication ensures your team stays aligned, the world around you won't remain static. Markets shift, priorities evolve, and challenges emerge. Adapting your strategy is the next natural step in reinforcing it, ensuring it remains relevant and actionable in dynamic environments. This is tricky, and I will encourage you to read the book Measures of Success, which I include in the resources for the Measuring Success chapter. Mark Graban points out in that book that leaders will often measure key performance indicators, or KPIs, and they'll see a dip, prompting them to write a bunch of emails and schedule a bunch of meetings to determine what is causing the problem, and then to a reaction and potentially a new strategy. I've seen this often where leaders jump and react because page views are down, or revenue dropped for a month, or inbound search traffic declined. It was so bad at one place I worked that leadership would get some news, call a meeting together, and dictate a far-reaching and tremendous shift in work priorities and focuses. Then, 2 days later, it would become evident that what they were reacting to was just a blip, and they reversed their decisions. We called it flop and twitch, because the leaders weren't going anywhere. They were flopping around like a fish on the dock, gasping for air. Graban's book will teach you how to measure KPIs in a way that separates signal from noise. I want you to hear 2 things from me in this course section. First, developing and sticking to a strategy with discipline is crucial. If you haven't finished your current work, you can't measure success, which means you don't know if the current tactics are working. You and your team formed a hypothesis, developed a strategy, and then created objectives and tactics based on sound reasoning, and you shouldn't abandon those recklessly. Second, it is critical to pivot if there is a significant change in the climate or landscape where you're operating. In the chapter Objectives and Tactics, I'll teach you about HOSKERS, which stands for Hypothesis, Objectives, Signals, and Key Results. Before forming the hypothesis, you first define your worldview, and after measuring the key results, you may need to revise your worldview. If you get a clear signal that something has changed, you may need to revise your worldview sooner than anticipated. If that happens, you must form new hypotheses, and new objectives and tactics will flow from that. But don't pivot because of some noise. That's where teams and companies go astray, and their flop and twitch reaction means they'll do nothing but lose. In implementing strategy, you'll face competing demands, unexpected requests, and occasionally the HIPPO, highest paid person's opinion, that seems to come out of nowhere. Knowing how to navigate these situations is crucial for maintaining strategic integrity while preserving relationships. When possible, try to fit requests into your strategic framework. Look for ways to connect seemingly tangential requests to your broader objectives, framing them as opportunities rather than distractions. When necessary, don't hesitate to push back, but do so with evidence. User testing results, opportunity cost analysis, or data on resource constraints can provide objective grounds for your position. Remember, not every fight is worth it. Occasionally, accommodating a small off-strategy request is better for maintaining momentum and goodwill. The key is distinguishing between minor compromises that won't derail your strategy and significant deviations that could undermine your core objectives. Adaptation is part of evolution, and we adapt in response to signals so we can survive and succeed. Making a change because of noise isn't adapting, it's reacting fearfully. Being a good leader will require you to separate signal from noise and lead your team with discipline through both times of change and times of noise when change isn't warranted. Let's bring this back to the question at hand. How do you communicate strategy well? To summarize, that depends on your team, but I have found that visuals help alongside more traditional business documents, that we must reiterate our strategy frequently and consistently, and that we must create time and space for people to absorb the strategy and plan. Collaborative workshops help create alignment and ownership across departments. Mind mapping can bridge the gap between high-level strategy and tactical execution. Tailoring your communication to different audiences ensures everyone gets the information they need in a format that works for them. Giving people an opportunity to debate and discuss strategy will also help them mold it, improve their understanding, and take ownership of the strategy. With this foundation established, people will also be prepared to adapt the strategy if need be. But you should only pivot if the landscape or climate has actually changed. If there isn't a clear signal that demands revising your current worldview, you should stick with the strategy, objectives, and tactics that are currently in progress so you can deliver them and measure their success. Remember that management is work. No simple spreadsheet will do the job for you. You must consistently communicate and reinforce the strategy in everything you do. As the leader, it's your job to be the guardian of strategic integrity while also being responsive to genuine needs for adaptation. The most successful strategy implementations aren't about perfection. They're about progress, learning, and adjustment. By applying the principles we've discussed, from collaborative alignment to disciplined communication to thoughtful adaptation, you'll create an environment where strategy becomes more than words on a page. It becomes the living, breathing foundation for your team's decisions and value delivery. By doing this work, you'll get a successful outcome that will help you, your team, and your company win.